Welcome everyone to the introduction to Job, a tale of a man's suffering. Job 42:2. Lord, I know that you can do anything and that your plans are unstoppable. So, I did say in my introduction to the entirety of this Bible study series that I will be doing Job alongside Genesis as a secondary series. So, that is what we're doing. We're going to be introducing Job. We're starting off with what is the title of the book? Well, traditionally, the first word of the book is its title. In this case, the first word in Hebrew is, meaning a man. I know it looks the same in English. Anyway, therefore, the traditional title throughout time has remained Yov or Job. That's Hebrew for Job. So that would be pretty weird if the title were just a man. So Job is the title of the book that has been traditionally recognized to give it more meaning. Okay, this is about a man named Job. Who wrote Job? Two solid views. The following two views are what I deem the third and second best views on who wrote Job. I believe the Elihu view to be stronger. Other views include, but not limited to, Job, Isaiah, Hezekiah, Jeremiah, and Ezra. The first view I deem likely is Elihu. Elihu is a young man, Job 32, 4 and 6, and could have lived long enough to write about the events he directly witnessed. The Bible mysteriously never mentions that God condemned or praised Elihu, so there is a possibility that God appeared to him and inspired him to write the book. The second view is Moses, which is also a Jewish tradition. You see here, this is a Talmudic text, Baba Bartha 14b, which tells us that Moses wrote it. This is a Jewish tradition. Moses could have picked up the story from Midian, which is right next to Uz. So what I want to do quickly is just open up a commentary. Arthur's introduction to Job, and he says here the book does not name its author. Job is an unlikely candidate because the book's message rests on Job's ignorance of the events that occurred in heaven as they related to his ordeal. One Talmudic tradition is the Talmud, right? Suggests Moses as its author since the land of Uz in 1:1, that's where Job was from, was adjacent, meaning it was right next to, having the same line, the same border, to Midian, where Moses lived for 40 years. And he could have obtained a record of the story there. Solomon is, we'll get into that in a second. Solomon is also a good possibility due to the similarity of content with parts of the book of Ecclesiastes, as well as the fact that Solomon wrote other wisdom books, except Psalms, and he did author Psalm 72 and 127. Though he lived long after Job, Solomon could have written about the events that occurred long ago before his own time, in much the same manner as Moses was inspired to write about Adam and Eve. Elihu, Isaiah, Hezekiah, Jeremiah, and Ezra have also been suggested as possible authors, but without support. So that is the John MacArthur introduction. And actually, hold on a second. We're supposed to move on to the next slide. A third view, and which is my view, and a fourth view, just for fun. So, I believe the best candidate for the authorship of Job is Solomon. The wisdom and poetic style of the book fits very well with Solomon, who wrote many poetic books. It's possible Job was an oral and written tradition, and Solomon made it into what we now call Job. David is also a possible, though less likely, candidate, in my opinion. David was a master poet and wrote many popular psalms. It's important to note, however, that David was more well known for psalms, songs of praise, instead of wisdom literature. We must also remember that the Bible never tells us who wrote it, so we cannot be dogmatic over the author, and there needs to be much grace concerning this. Ultimately, the Holy Spirit is the divine author, which is important to note for all of these books. In trying to identify the human author, we must remember the divine author is the Holy Spirit. So, I believe Solomon definitely is the best view. It fits well with his style of wisdom literature, where he wrote Ecclesiastes, much of Proverbs. Solomon was a man of wisdom. This fits his style because there's a lot of wisdom being portrayed in Job. Why is God doing this? Why is God letting me suffer? So I think Solomon is the best view, and I would argue that he had possibly oral traditions, but also written traditions about Job. So let us move on to the next slide. When was Job written? Depending on who you believe wrote the book, for example, if Elihu, this would be sometime around maybe 2000 BC or earlier, depending on when the events of Job happened. The date of the book may vary. So, or also, for example, Moses, you could say, okay, maybe Moses wrote it towards the end of his life, maybe around almost 1401, who knows? Since I believe Solomon wrote the book, this would place the date sometime in the 10th century during his reign, which was roughly 970 to 931 BC. I would say it would probably be before he turned from God in 1 Kings 11, so a date of maybe 945 BC can be given, though it's hard to tell. Again, can't be dogmatic over it. It could be earlier, it could be 950, it could be 940. We don't know. I'm giving the safe date of 945 roughly. I think it's more likely that he wrote it before turning from God, because I don't know if he would write a work about God while he was worshiping false pagan gods and marrying a bunch of pagan women. I don't know if he'll be writing a story of God and God's goodness during that time. An overview of Job. You see this nice picture in the background of a man praying. The book of Job tackles a very difficult issue of suffering and God's goodness. Throughout the study, we will explore God's goodness and suffering. This is what is called a theodicy. So this is going to be the difficult question we'll be exploring throughout the study. God and suffering. Why does God allow suffering? Is God still good even though he allows suffering? What are the best answers to suffering? We have different theodicies. We have free will defense. Well, that's more for a problem of evil. But we have people that will appeal to maybe free will. They'll appeal to mystery. Different things. There are different things people appeal to. But ultimately, we're going to try to let the text of Job speak and try to figure out, why does God allow suffering? What does Job tell us? We will see how Job foreshadows Christ, such as the need for a mediator in Job 9:33. All right, so look at this. This is Job 9:33. Nor is there any mediator between us. This is a direct foreshadowing here of Christ, who is the mediator between God and man, the man Jesus Christ. There may be supposed scientific errors along the way, so we will tackle them as we go. I heard that supposedly Job 37 has flat earth descriptions, so we will be looking into that, seeing, all right, is Job describing a flat earth? Or Job describing, is there any contradictions with science? Remember, Job is not a science. The entirety of the Bible is not a scientific textbook. I've said this before, and I'm going to keep stressing this throughout our studies of the Bible. The Bible is not a scientific textbook. Even when there seems something like, look, this is a scientific miracle, even then, I would say be cautious of that. I do believe the Bible's miraculous, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every time we see something that looks like, oh, this is science, we don't have to say it's a scientific miracle or error. Look deeper. What is actually being said? One thing I appeal to is phenomenological descriptions. Descriptions of something based on a first-person point of view instead of necessarily a scientific observation or objective observation. A first-person point of view. For example, the sun looks like it sets, but in reality, the Earth just turns. So we'll be looking to that, seeing what is the text saying. Is it really saying in a flat Earth or whatever kind of scientific error someone will come up with? We'll look into that. Compare the actions and words of everyone. Pay attention especially to Job's three friends who misrepresented God. Look, it says right here, Job 42:7. And so it was after the Lord, or after Yahweh had spoken these words to Job, that that Yahweh said to Eliphaz, I like to say Yahweh instead, the Temanite, my wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. They have misrepresented God. They have not spoken of God what is right. So, pay attention to what the different attitudes and actions of different people. Pay attention to Job himself. Pay attention to his wife. We're going to look at that. Pay attention to his friends and to Elihu also. And then, take a look at God and Satan as well, which we're actually going to talk about here. Satan, Hebrew for the accuser, also plays an important role. He seeks to accuse Job and bring him down. So Satan it's important to acknowledge him in this scenario. Satan is absolutely involved. God can allow Satan to do certain things for his glory. So God allowed Satan. Did I say Satan allowed? Okay. So God allows Satan to do things for his glory. God can allow Satan, for example, to harm Job for his glory. We're going to be looking into that. Satan involved in suffering. And we're going to be looking at his role in the story about an accuser. When it says that Satan was going to and fro on the earth, many commentators argue that that's actually him looking for evidence against people, going to and fro. So, Satan, the accuser, he accuses Job. He only loves you because of what you gave him. We're going to be looking into that. So, pretty short introduction, but there's not as much that I really wanted to talk about as with the Genesis introduction. So, yeah, this is the overview of Job. Will be a very deep study, very difficult topics to talk about normally for people, but I think we'll be able to handle it here. And with that being said, God bless you all and goodbye.